And that's, I think, a lesson for people with similar backgrounds to us, people in India, Middle East, is that the front door is not always the right door. And what I mean by that is that if you are creative enough and if you are hardworking enough, there are a lot of other doors open to you. So you might not be the best, most book smart, like sort of the IIT sort of path is a very zero sum path, right? It is like very few people can go into there. It's a very competitive path.
Hey Amjad, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. You're also our first US guest, so we're quite excited about this one.
It's an honor to be here, and thank you for having me.
Awesome. So Amjad, we'll start with our favorite question, which is Peter Thiel's question. What's uh, one thing you believe in which very few people agree with you on?
Um, I recently did a Twitter thread about the future of software development, and in it, I made a prediction that I got quite a bit of pushback on. I said that in the next few years, and maybe before the end of the decade, the average human being will have the same command of software as John Carmack, the legendary software engineer, um, and and then professional software developers will get 100x to 1,000x more productive. And so that sort of prediction is just based on the progress we're making, especially around AI and AI for code, and especially when you layer these kind of tools on top of an existing tool like Replit. And I'm sure we'll get into what Replit is and Replit on the phone. But I really believe that we are at the start of an exponential curve of productivity and efficiency for how humans can interact with computers and software. Because I think up until today, for the most part, people have been mostly consumers of software as opposed to producers. And I feel like that's largely a technological problem that I think is going to get solved pretty soon. And so I got quite a bit of pushback from like industry veterans, and the CEO of Epic Games replied and said
Mhm.
that's impossible. And so so
Amazing.
that's something that not a lot of people believe in. But I've always believed that programming is going to be get more accessible even for the average person.
That's amazing. I think getting a large group of people to react and so strongly against to what you said clearly makes it look like it's something a lot of people don't believe in. If you had to argue on their side, why do you believe this? I mean, to me intuitively it seems to make sense, but what do you think is the reason why there was so much pushback?
Yeah, I mean, if you're a professional software engineer, you're sort of spending all day in obscure bugs and
Hmm.
really having to understand the intricacies of systems. And then you look around and you're like, oh, there's all these normal people that are not suffering in the same way that I'm suffering. And
Right.
they will and they will not want to be part of this madness. And in some
Right.
sense it's true, but I don't think they're projecting forward as to how software will change and
Hmm.
how higher level things are. So if you think about, the early days of programming, it was doing punch cards.
Yes.
You literally had like punching holes on a card, and
Right.
then you had assembly, right? And then you had C programming, and then you had scripting, and then you have the cloud and open source. Every one of those steps made programming 10 to 100x more accessible. The average JavaScript developer today would have never punched cards, right?
Right.
And so these steps are orders of magnitude, and I think people who are the most experts tend to actually really it's hard for them to imagine how things could get better and different.
Right. Understand. So I think what you're saying is it's a combination of them being in the weeds as well as potentially some pushback saying that, hey, this is my sacred space and there are no other people who should have access to it. I think that's, if that's a summary of what you said.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting when you look at expert predictions. The night before the atom was split, there was a
Hmm.
very famous physicist that said that this was never happen. This will never
Hmm.
happen, and it was printed in the paper. Forgot his name now. We could probably look it up, but um, it, you know, I think the same week that the first flight by the Wright brothers, you had experts interviewed in the New York Times saying that that was impossible, right? And so
Right.
expert prediction is actually tend to be not very good.
Hmm.
And there's a question as to why. And I think being in the weeds is, I think, one of them because they know how hard it is to be in the weeds, and they're like, it's really hard for them to see the breakthrough.
Right. Amazing. And I think it ties back very nicely with your story. You have a very atypical background. I think a lot of folks in India would relate. You're from Jordan, which is emerging market, just like India. I think slightly far ahead, but almost the same. Could you talk about childhood, early days? One thing I'd love for you to touch upon is, in India, people have a concept of a set path and they will not deviate from it. For example, being rebellious in school or college, or, not going to classes is something that very, very few people do. I understand that those are some things that you did. So would love to learn about your early days as well as finding what you really liked and falling in love with code.
Yeah, absolutely. So, um, actually, Jordan and India has a lot in common. Both prior British colonies,
Right.
both have sort of big value on education, English speaking, sort of Western in attitude, and so at the same time, the sort of the typical stereotype of an Indian parent applies almost perfectly to like a Jordanian Middle Eastern parent. Like, you have to do your homework, you have to become a doctor, you have to become an engineer, you have to like do on this set path,
Right.
and luckily we don't have the IIT sort of madness that you have. So our universities are not as competitive, so we don't it's not as sort of we don't have that sort of like emphasis on like just like being just studying so much and like so hard to
Right.
get into the best universities. Um, but a lot of it is sort of the same, and you grow up and your parents will tell you, um, hey, like here's the path, like you study well, you do the things you're supposed to do. You get a good degree in engineering or a doctor or a lawyer. You're gonna have a good life. You're gonna get on this good salary path. Uh, Find a good wife, probably also arranged marriage, or someone your mom knows, and then buy a home, and the cycle repeats. The thing about that is that the world kind of changed, and they don't understand that. Um, I think that this kind of path was not the norm in the history of humanity. Um, but it was a moment in time. It was like post-war world up until maybe a decade ago or a couple decades ago. It was like it was this moment in time where really there was a path, right? Like there was the path, and you could do that. And I actually think a lot of parents do not know that. but the world has radically changed, and the path actually, in a lot of ways, doesn't exist anymore. Like if you're, someone in the U.S., um, by the time you finish college, you're sort of saddled with so much debt. Buying a home is so outside of your ability. Like maybe when you're 50, after you're done paying off your debt, and after you, and so things have changed so much. I think the world now expects people to be a lot more adaptable. Things like AI is changing work in a radical way. Like Chat GPT is now like, can pass the bar exam, can pass some medical exams. And so every year there's a new radical breakthrough that fundamentally changes how we do things, right? And so what the world demands of us today is to be radically adaptable and to be able to be different and to be able to generate a lot of ideas. Also demands from us to be very technical. And I think, learning to code, getting into computers, robotics, those kind of things early in life is probably very important in the world to come. So for me, uh, my father was really into computers early on, and so I'm lucky to have him as that. He's an engineer working at the government, very modest salary, but he sort of YOLO'd his salary into a computer in the
Right.
1990 in
The, the, the
1993.
the same thing happened with me and my dad, by the way.
Oh, really?
He also, yeah, so he worked with this company called Tata Steel, which is one of the largest steel makers. And before we had a car, we had a computer. So I remember, like, when I was 3, playing around with logo, putting a credit card in a floppy drive is what my parents told me. Um, but yeah, he too YOLO'd his salary into a computer.
Yeah. So we're thankful for that,
Yes,
So
absolutely, absolutely.
and so yeah, I learned a bit of programming pretty early on. Got interested in computers very very early on when I was like 6 years old. Um, but nonetheless, I got really good at it, and I was able to make money when I was a teenager. Nonetheless, when the time came to go to college, my father almost forced me to get into computer engineering as opposed to software and programming, because he thought programming is not a real engineering job, because the sort of Ministry of Education in Jordan did not let you get a like engineering sort of degree if you're a programmer. And so yeah, and so I sort of rebelled against that, and I didn't really want to do it, and I didn't really pay attention to class all that much. I just stayed at home programming. I would like not really go to school, um and uh and I think that ultimately benefited me, because I just started working. I started working first in IT, and then I went into software. And ultimately, a lot of this sort of led to Replit, because when going to college, finally, without telling my father, I switched back to computer science. And the first thing that I noticed is setting up the development environment is one of the hardest things you can do when you're just starting to learn a new programming language. As you all probably know this, anyone who's taking computer science 101, like, you go to like a Java object-oriented programming and Java class, and, you're asked to do a homework, but now like, you have to, spend a couple of hours figuring out how to download a Java IDE, figuring out how the libraries all work together. God forbid you want to share that code with your friend. You got to make sure they have the right DLLs and the right everything. And I was like, this is crazy. Like, you should be able to just like give you a link, and for you to kind of go into that link and see exactly what I'm seeing and like run that code. And that's basically, what led to the idea that led to Replit. And um, I started skipping class and just working on this in this maniacal way, because I really knew that this thing should exist. And it had a breakthrough, um, which led to an open source project which you got me a job at Codeacademy in the US. And I'm sort of jumping around the story. Happy to dig into it.
And what age were you, just from a timeline perspective? And I think before Code Academy, you were at Yahoo in Jordan, for a bit. Can you talk us through your early exposures with code, your early exposures with a large Western company building tech, and
Yeah.
then how did this evolve into, you called it Replit then as well, and then I
Yes.
think the Code Academy founders found your environment, and then they used it for Code Academy, and they were super impressed. So that's a story we'd love to get into, if you can
Yeah.
talk through that.
Sure. So I released Replit in 2011.
Okay.
Sorry, so it's 2010, just before I finished university, 2009, 2010, we released this open source project called JS REPL. So JS REPL was the engine behind Replit. So JS REPL was a JavaScript engine that ran code in languages that the browser would not run. So the
Hmm.
browser can run one language, which is JavaScript, right? And with something like Replit, we wanted people to be able to experience a lot of different languages and code in any language. Today, Replit is like the platform that supports all the languages. That's what we're known for. And and so at the time, I didn't have money to pay for servers to run the code in these languages. And so the breakthrough we had is like we would compile something like Python to JavaScript. And we were the
Hmm.
first to do that. And so I released this as an open source project. And then, at the time I sort of finished university, the open source project went viral on the internet. People started using it in the US and places like that. I thought it'd be great for me to build a startup on it. And so I had the idea for Replit as a startup. I actually had the vision for everything that we're building today, like the social network around the idea of sharing and collaboration and hosting. I was like just really dreaming big. And everyone, my friends, thought I was crazy. They were like, "You're in the
Yeah,
clouds."
this is the same that Indian founders see with their friends and family. I'm sure it comes from the same societal background.
Yes, exactly. And they mean well, but they're kind of they want you to like wake up. But I'd rather be dreaming actually.
Correct.
Um, and so I finished university, and family pressure, friends, whatever. You got to get a job, right? Although I had this thing that was working, like people were using it. It was open source. And so, okay, I was like, okay, I'll get a job and then I'll continue working on this on the side. At the time, Yahoo acquired, just like a few months before, acquired a company in Jordan called Maktub. So Maktub was the
Okay.
first Arabic email service. So
Oh,
yeah, and then it's a sort of branch that became web forums, and it really became Yahoo of the Middle East. And Yahoo came in and bought it for like a couple $100 million, which was the biggest exit in Jordanian startup history. It's probably still one of the biggest today.
right. I'm sure.
Yeah, and so it was a huge deal, and so it was the company that uh, I thought would be like a good introduction to Silicon Valley, to how Silicon Valley would do software. I was interested in JavaScript, right? It was really my view was that the browser is going to become this massive application platform, which it has become, and that Yahoo was investing heavily in JavaScript. They had Yahoo Mail. They had YUI, which was a JavaScript library like jQuery, and I thought it would be a great environment for me to learn. So I did an interview with them, and I ended up passing. And basically, all the top people in my university got into Yahoo. Um, to my surprise, we got into a sinking ship. Um,
Hmm.
Basically, it was Yahoo in 2011. It was like the peak of the decline. It was before Marissa Mayer joined. It was I forgot another CEO, and Yahoo had this idea that they're not a tech company anymore. They started calling themselves a media company. So they said we
Oh
have these
wow.
media
Okay.
properties. Yeah, we're not a tech company. We have these media properties. They even will tell us that software and software developers are a liability, not an asset for the company.
This
And
is
actually,
Yahoo in 2011. I
yes,
can't believe that. Wow.
yeah. There's a Paul Graham essay about this because Paul Graham um, was I'll send it to you. You can put it in the show notes. But Paul Graham was acquired by Yahoo. So Paul Graham built this thing called VeaWeb, and it got acquired by
Correct.
Yahoo. And he wrote about his time at Yahoo, and he made the same observation that here's a company that was intrinsically a tech company. It had product managers, programmers, everything, but they resented the fact that they're a tech company. Um, and so you look at the opposite extent, which is Google, and Google was like, we're absolutely 100% engineering company, right? We're going to build all these products. We're going to make all these breakthroughs. Some will work and become like a Gmail, and others, will have to kill. But like they were very prolific. They built a lot of things. They knew that engineering is their asset. So I knew it was a sinking ship. I did my work and I did really well. I did better than a lot of people there. Uh, but at the same time, I didn't want to hitch my career to this thing. And so I started working on Replit again, weekends and weeknights. And, we had this infrastructure tool that was open source. And now I wanted to build a product on top of it. And the product that you see today, is similar to the vision that I had back then.
And so while
Um,
you're working on Yahoo, this kind of open source project just kept going, and people were using it to build their own layer on top of it. Is that
Yeah, Udacity used it. Codeacademy used it. In 2011, there was this huge explosion in what was called MOOCs at the time. So massively open,
Coursera and
massively
others.
open source. Yeah, Coursera, Udacity, all these things started around the same time. And there was this feeling that education was coming online. And to some extent, that was true. It really didn't pan out like people thought it would be. Maybe that's a discussion for another time. But Replit and the open source project behind it actually played a big role. People do not know this, but we played a big role in this because all these companies wanted to do in-browser coding exercises that are now very popular. And the best way to do it is to use our software because we can run any language in the browser very easily. So they were all using it, and I started getting job offers left and right. And yeah, you have to remember, like before that, I actually applied to Google. I applied to a lot of companies in the U.S. Nobody would respond to my email, and suddenly, everyone wants to talk to me. Everyone wants to submit bugs. Peter Norvig, who was working at Udacity at the time, he's a famous Google engineer, emailed us with questions. Um, and that's, I think, a lesson for people with similar backgrounds to us, people in India, Middle East, is that the front door is not always the right door. And what I mean by that is that if you are creative enough and if you are hardworking enough, there are a lot of other doors open to you. So you might not be the best, most book smart, like sort of the IIT sort of path is a very zero sum path, right? It is like very few people can go into there. It's a very competitive path. But there's the open source path. There's the path of online entrepreneurship. There's a micro SaaS path. There's a ton of paths now accessible to you. And the one path for me was to build a successful open source project that gets used by companies in the US. And that was really my out, or my sort of big breakthrough. And Codeacademy got me an O1 visa, and I came to the US in 2012.
so? Quick question there. I mean, you had a lot of interest at that point. Everyone was doing software. Why Code Academy? What made you pick them
Because I just
specifically?
liked startups. like my experience at Yahoo was sort of like traumatizing. I
It's just
was like,
far away from a big company as you can.
yeah, I want to like get me out of here, get me out of like the politics, the posturing, the buzzwords. Oh my god, HTML5 was a buzzword at the
Yeah.
time. And like you could see like the least competent people were rising to the top.
Just
Like
people who are
it
best
was a
at
very perverse
playing
environment.
politics, right? Playing the game.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Oh, amazing. And so Code Academy, and then you moved with them to the US. And can you tell us about your journey from there?
Yeah. So two guys out of YC, they use the open source projects that we built to build this really cool experience that is now like become standard. Like a lot of people just think of the Code Academy experience where you have the instruction on the left, you have the sort of REPL environment on the right, and it just becomes a standard thing. But they sort of innovated on that, and they got like 200,000 users, I think, in the first 5 days or something like that from launching. It went super viral on Hacker News, Reddit, whatever. And I was like, this is really exciting. I want to be part of that. So I came to the US and I landed. They luckily they remembered to pick me up from the airport, um, but that was the extent to it because I came to the office and they had I think a VC meeting and they had to leave that day. So I was at the office. I didn't have money. I didn't have anywhere to stay. Uh, so I had saved up some money from Yahoo. But on my way out of the airport in Jordan, the airport did not understand my visa. They did not. They didn't think it was like a resident visa. They, so they forced me to buy a ticket back. And so I had maybe like $1,000, and I had to like buy a ticket, and then I had like maybe like $50 left. So here I am in New York City, nowhere to stay, $50 in my pocket. Um, and I just like slept in the office, and I was like working the whole time there. And so it was like a bit of a rough experience. I was also not making a lot of money at the time. I had negotiated a lot of equity, which actually paid off because Code Academy just exited like a few months ago. So I'm
Oh,
happy about
after
that.
10 years. After
10
10
years
years.
after 10
Yes.
years, I finally saw something from that.
Yes.
Yeah,
Amazing.
the startup game is a long game, as you know, as a
Very
VC.
long.
The venture game is really, really long. Um, so, uh, so yeah, we were very, very small. Eventually, like found a place to stay, saved a little bit of money, and uh, it was super fun. In 2012, like the startup ecosystem in the US is very different than today. It was a lot wilder. Like tech was still sort of the underdog, right? We weren't. There weren't a lot of hate. Facebook was just IPOing, and there was a lot of excitement around it. Um, there wasn't a lot of politics in tech, as you know now. All those sort of walkouts and all the activism and all the stuff like that. It was a much simpler time, and we were having a lot of fun and coding a lot and generating a lot of ideas and things like that. I would say like one big lesson in terms of like what I didn't do at Replit, like the things I learned not to do is over celebrate early wins. Like I think it's easy to see like, okay, we got 200,000 users, we're done, right? And there was this feeling at Code Academy that we've won. And at Replit, we almost always have the opposite feeling. And like I developed this feeling of like really kind of always feeling like the underdog, always feeling like we haven't won, always feeling like we're just getting started. Because I felt like we got a little complacent in Code Academy very early on. And the other thing was to take management seriously. I think a lot of startups, you know, you can be all flat you want, but you have to manage performance. You have to manage people who are toxic out. You have to manage the culture, and to be like a lot more intentional about how you're building the company and the culture.
No, that's fascinating. And I think you mentioned Facebook. That's your next stop.
Yeah.
Um, I'd love for you to talk about why that transition happened. A very critical decision that you made was to become a founder. I think you'd written an essay around that time, which is the balance between the finite and infinite,
Yes.
which I found quite interesting. It's very hard for people to take the leap. So if you can talk through that journey, how did you decide? You've been building Replit for 3 4 years now, and by the time you exit Facebook it's 5, but then you pull the trigger. So what, if you can talk us through that journey just before you start Replit.
Yeah. So I decided to leave Codeacademy because I wanted like different challenges. Um, Part of the reason why I went to Facebook, I just wanted to go to a bigger company to relax a little bit, because I was sort of burnt out at that time. I hadn't made a lot of money. I was sort of like living like, paycheck to paycheck. I was like, okay, I wanted to just like focus on life a little bit. Turns out like Facebook is actually the wrong place to do that in, because Facebook in 2013 was still intense. It was super intense. I think Facebook became big tech maybe in 2016, 17, but up until that, they actually maintained the startup pace, like very long,
For a
even after.
decade almost is what you're saying, right?
Yeah,
The 2005 to 6, that's incredible.
yeah, it's amazing what they've done. And so I went there, and people were working their ass off, and so I was also inspired by Mark's vision for Internet.org, so which I know it was controversial in India because of the zero rating stuff. But
Correct.
I think that the feeling behind it was right. Like I think the idea, and which is like why at Replit we're excited about India, is like this idea like there's going to be like hundreds of millions of people coming online, and Facebook's idea was that they're all going to be using their phones, and Android is going to be a very important platform for the future. And so I wanted to contribute to that somehow. I don't know how, but so I joined Facebook. I started doing some Android programming, and I discovered that Android making apps for Android is absolutely awful, especially like a really big app like Facebook. Like the
Hmm.
Java ecosystem is just horrible, and I always get attracted to kind of like solving developer problems.
Right.
And so I thought I could like build a better experience for developers. And so I started prototyping this idea of like, can you use web technologies to build apps? It wasn't like a very novel idea, but I thought I could do a better job at it. Well, it turns out there's another project in the company that was trying to bring React JS, which
Right.
was
Correct. Which
new
is
and
now,
growing at the time. Yeah.
right.
And so they were trying to bring React JS to mobile development. So that became React Native, and I joined as one of the founding engineers on that, and I built a developer tool chain around that, the SDK and all of that. And it became like one of the most popular ways to program phones. It makes programming phones a lot more accessible. It helped us build the mobile app, which I'm sure we'll touch on in a bit. But that's a sort of a full circle moment where something that I worked on at Facebook ended up helping us build something at Replit. So in 2016, my time at Facebook was coming sort of to a natural conclusion. Like, React Native was out and it was growing. The team that I built at Facebook around JavaScript infrastructure was sort of off to the races. We've built a lot of the popular JavaScript tool chains that we have today. And I just felt like, okay, like I need a time for a new challenge. Um, and, Haya, my wife, who's a designer who will work on a lot of things together, we were like looking around and asking like, okay, what happened to this like online coding space? And so there was like some IDEs in the browser, like Cloud9, a few others, but there wasn't anything that matched our original vision for Replit, which is something like web native, something I can give you a link and you can get access to the same machine, somewhere where I can host my code, somewhere I can install any library, somewhere where we can code together in the same document, um, and somewhere where I can do any kind of programming.
So you thought about it like 5 years before, and like 5, 6 years later, people were using it, but still no one had actually done it. I mean, that's
Yeah, no
insane.
one has actually built the entire vision, and I was like, it's kind of crazy. And like, so we looked at Replit, the website that we had that we sort of abandoned, and there were still like 10,000 users a month, kind of like using it, and they were submitting bug reports, and so Haya sort of picked it up. She did some user research, and she's like, man, like these people are getting a lot of value out of this. And I'm like, okay, I guess I can fix it up a little bit. And so started started fixing it and started doing some small touches here and there. At the time, I ended up writing a system to move the code evaluation to the server. That unlocked a lot of different features and more stability and things like that. And we started seeing immediate growth. So, my job at Facebook was sort of coming to a natural conclusion. This thing was starting to take off again. So 5 6 years in the making, we gave it some love and it started taking off. um and it was coming to an impasse. It's like, okay, do I want to be a founder? um I had seen Codeacademy and had seen the founder madness, and I had seen Ryan and Zach, who are phenomenal founders, took it all the way from decade to an exit. And I wasn't sure I wanted to be a founder. It was like it was going to be a lot of pain,
Right.
and I was like, do I want to sign myself up for like more pain? I was like, I had this like Facebook thing going, and for the first time, I had like a normal life where we traveled and did some fun stuff, and I started working out, and I had like really developed some hobbies and things like that. And we actually tried to sell a Replit at that point. We're like, okay, this thing is taking
Oh,
off. Maybe we can sell it. Yeah. Um, and we had some conversations, but like nothing was really interesting. I tried to also make it a Facebook project. So I told my managers like, hey, like, can I like work on this at Facebook? Like, happy to sign over the IP. That didn't work.
big
Um,
mistake, I would
yeah,
say.
that would have been a big mistake. Yeah, for me and
No,
big
big
now.
mistake for them, big
Yeah.
mistake for Facebook.
Um,
Yeah.
so ultimately, like, when I wrote that blog post about the finite and the infinite, I was like just dealing with this inner conversation of like, what does it mean to do good work? Like, what does it mean to have an impact? Because Facebook talks a lot about impact, but ultimately, like, one thing I talk about in the article is like, if you're doing something that anyone else can do, then you're not really having an impact. You're replaceable. You're a cog in a machine. And so if you're going to do something that is intrinsic to yourself, then that's real impact in the world. Um, and the idea behind the infinite and the finite is that like you can dream all you want, but you have to do something immediately. You have to impact the world in a positive way. Um, and so I think people who are just stuck in the finite, they do meaningless work and they don't really have an impact. People who are stuck in infinite, they dream and they never do anything. And so the idea is like you need to actually dream, but you also need to bring your dreams to a reality. Um, and so after a lot of thinking, and Hai and I decided to take the plunge. I quit my job at Facebook and we started Replit full time April 2016.
Very cool. Just before Mazen picks up, there's a slightly philosophical discussion on, in India, a lot of people believe, especially the ones who think of the spiritual level, which is you are one part of a puzzle and that's what you are, and that gives people happiness. I think you've taken the opposite view, which is interesting as well. It's a longer conversation, but I think it's an interesting approach, which is if you are not replaceable, that's when you matter. In a lot of spiritual thinking in India, especially in Buddhism, people believe that you are one part of the puzzle and you just play the role that you're destined to play. So
Well,
it's
so I don't.
interesting.
Yeah, I don't think they're extremely at odds. I think there's one way to read it as
Right.
at odds, but actually, like what I'm saying is that you have to find the piece of the
Your role.
puzzle that was like so intrinsic to you, that is like so
Right.
unique to you. Um, and so I think
Right.
every piece of puzzle is unique and intrinsic. It's irreplaceable because
Right.
it has a place in the puzzle that is actually very unique to it. Um, and so I actually think these things are sort of related, and I wanted to find my place in the world that was sort of irreplaceable.
Awesome.
And now you've touched on this a lot, but just for our listeners, if you can maybe talk a bit about what exactly Replit is, and why is there a need to make coding more fun? And what was that vision that you had 5 years before you actually started to like see it materialize?
Yeah. So Replit is the easiest way to start coding online, um, or anywhere. Like it's really the easiest way to code. You can open a new browser tab, go to Replit, sign up in a minute, and then start in any language. If you don't know how to code, we'll teach you how to code. We have this thing called 100 days of Python. If you commit to 20 minutes a day, we will bring you to full proficiency in Python. You will be able to get a job in Python after those 100 days. um, and then after that, you can also use it on your phone. If you want to share a program with someone, you can just give them a link to the thing that you're building. If you want to build a web app, we'll host it for you. If you want a database, we'll give you a database. It's basically all your programming needs in one website that is extremely accessible. We're also building a set of AI tools to make programming more seamless and to keep you in flow. We have AI tools that complete the code that you're writing. It sort of reads your mind. That's what a lot of our users tells us. We call this ghostwriter. And it can also explain code for you. So if you find a piece of code, you can right click, explain it. We also have a community of creators, and you can see games and applications in the community. All of those games and applications are open source. You can go look at the files, you can fork them, you can change them, you can republish them, you can meet people. We have a lot of people. We have a big community. We have a big Indian community as well. We had a really big India meetup a couple of months ago. Um, yeah, and so uh, the idea about making programming more fun is, I think, with any industry, as it becomes more professionalized, sometimes it loses some of its roots. And I think programming started as a fundamentally fun, exciting thing. So if you look at, like, say, programming in the 80s or 70s, when you bought a PC or a Commodore 64, for example, it comes with a manual. And that manual has programs. So you can, like, it has like basic programs. Basic is a type of language. It had games in it. And the idea behind programming was always that it's fun and exciting and intellectually stimulating. Today, because it got sort of professionalized, just setting up, like we talked about, the setup experience is so difficult. To make a website, you have to learn 30 different technologies. It's become like a sort of like a maze, um, to like really make anything, get something up on the screen. by removing all that chores, Replit brings the fun back into programming. And then the thing that we're sort of more innovating on is, programming was typically seen as a solo activity, and we actually think that like the next phase, the next generation of programmers would want to do it together. So we have a real-time collaborative programming environment, or you could like collaborate sort of asynchronously and without even knowing each other. You can remix each other's work. You can get inspired by each other's libraries. You can hook into each other's services, and so it becomes this more dynamic network based activity that like more resembles a social media network than like a traditional professional network. um, and and finally, I think the AI piece also makes it more fun because it keeps you in the flow. A lot of programming is looking things up. So if we can make it so that you don't have to leave your programming environment to look things up, the AI can answer your questions, then that's going to even make it more fun, in my opinion.
And I think you stressed on the collaborative part. That's, I think, very interesting. Can you double click on why that's important?
Yeah. When I first saw Google Docs, um, it was obvious to me that like how people did work kind of changed forever. So in school, even back in 2008, we would like use Google Docs to collaborate on our assignments. We would like write in real time multiplayer. We would see each other's cursors. It was like this, just the fact of feeling someone's presence in the same document is kind of fun, right? Like we have a shared documents for this interview, and I opened this morning and I saw you in there. It was like a cool experience, right? I mean, so it's really a fundamentally different experience to actually feel someone's presence in your sort of work documents or your editor or what have you. Um, and and then it's sort of like layering on all these sort of nice features on top of multiplayer. For example, on Replit, if you click on someone, you can follow them, you can observe them as they're coding. So people use it to teach each other. So it's like, yeah, just follow me. I'll show you how to write this function. Um, you can like, highlight and comment something. People chat in the code as well. In the comments of the code, people chat.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and like humans are fundamentally like social animals, and we
Right.
like to do things together. And I think another we talked about our parents' generation, and I think what they um, how they viewed the world. And I think another thing that they viewed the world differently was like work was not supposed to be fun, right? Like
Right.
work is pain, right?
Right. You just
And
get paid for it.
yes,
Um,
yeah,
I, I think there's this really funny stand up that was done some time back where the stand up comic goes, Indian guy saying that I'm doing stand up, so the guys come and tell me that we're not going to pay you because you're having fun. And I think that's like the case in a lot of Asian cultures. I think Middle Eastern cultures as well. If you're having fun, it's not work, and you
yeah,
can't get paid for it.
yes. Yeah, it's wild that like, oh, you want to have fun at work? Like, what is this? Like, are you a child? Um, so yeah, I mean, like collaboration makes work fundamentally more fun and exciting because it's done with other people. Um, and so yeah, collaboration is going to be is a huge part of how we do things. Um, and it's and we're still like innovating on it. Like programming is still fundamentally like a single player experience, and I think there's a
Right.
lot of infrastructure to be built to make it more multiplayer.
And I think for a lot of people, learning how to code is sort of a mental block. What are some of those first barriers for people, and how does that differ? Maybe have you seen any differences, perhaps, between the U.S., India, Jordan, some of the countries that you've been in?
Yeah. um I think that so I just make sure I want to phrase this correctly, so I don't offend anyone. But the I think what we could learn from the West, and what I think places like Jordan could learn from the West and India, because it has like this attitude. You need an attitude of I can teach myself, and I don't think we have that. Like uh, I think this idea that education is happens at school is sort of this very traditional view. I think in America, um, they've actually they don't have that barrier, or at least less so than countries on the
Absolutely. It's
and
changing,
so
by the way, thankfully. Like YouTube is one of the largest apps in India, and India is the largest market. A lot of people have started learning on YouTube, but you're absolutely right. Culturally, um, we are averse to learning by ourselves and want to be taught.
yeah, in India actually on Replit, we have a lot of Indian users that are doing that, learning by themselves, tinkering. So India is ahead of a lot of countries in the East as well, but still there's like more progress to be made there. We really have to change our view that like self-learning is possible, and tinkering is super important. So, like, I can't emphasize how much tinkering is important. Like the idea of like just aimlessly playing with something, right? Like eh, yeah, you guys are probably younger than me, but like when I first saw Google search, I would play with Google search, right? Like when you see a technology, you would like play with it. This idea of like play, right? Now I'm playing with GPT-3 and Chat GPT,
Yes.
right? It's like you should tinker. You should always be like learning by tinkering. I think is a very underrated sort of skill, and takes this idea of like agency. You need to have agency. You need to have this feeling that you can learn by yourself.
No, I think that it's a fabulous skill to have, and it's probably the core of entrepreneurship. A
Yes.
startup is a hypothesis test, and then you're continuously tinkering and testing the hypothesis and changing, making. I think as a founder, if you don't know how to tinker, you can't be a founder, because it's about discovering what works.
Yeah.
Um, does the mobile version of Replit help with tinkering? I know that's also another thing that a lot of people would push back. People in the West, they're like, hey, you can go to a coffee shop and open your Mac and code. Why do you need a mobile phone? We Indians understand why. Obviously, in the US, it's not that big a deal. But I would love to understand how difficult was implementing that, and does it enable tinkering, better
Yeah.
coding?
Yeah. The other day, Indian YouTube influencer, I'm blanking in the name, um, did a video on Replit Mobile, um, and someone in the comments said, "Finally, I can code in school under my desk without." So and I thought that was
Amazing.
amazing. Yeah, that's what I would want to do, right? Because a lot of school is boring. So 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 yes, it absolutely helps with tinkering. Like I think, like try it yourself. Like the other day, I was at a coffee shop waiting for someone, and typically I would like open Twitter. Instead, I was like, okay, let me open Replit, and I started like writing, continuing in a program I was building, and it was like a really cool experience. I felt more productive time, and it absolutely helps with tinkering. I think like a lot of times you have an idea and you want to implement it really quickly, and just pulling it on your phone, just doing it, I think is a great idea. It also helps with learning. Like if you're doing the 20 minutes of Python a day, like you should be able to do it on your phone. Like if you're someone who don't have access to a desktop computer, should be able to learn entirely on your phone. Especially there are features on Android and iOS where you can make YouTube picture in picture, right? So you can open the Replit app and you can have a YouTube, and so you can watch a video and you can be following the instructions and code. And so you can use YouTube with the Replit app, and it's like actually a very good experience. So yeah, it enables all sorts of tinkering, and we haven't added the community features to the mobile app yet, but we're working on that. And once we have that, it's going to be really exciting. You can go to the community, find an app you like, and just like hit fork. That gives you a copy of it, and you can change something about it. And I think that's like one of the best ways to tinker. In terms of
Yeah,
like,
and
go
sorry,
ahead.
go ahead, Amjad.
I was just gonna say, like, in terms of like how hard, you asked how hard it was to build it. It was like one of the hardest projects at Replit.
Right.
Um, like the actual app took a year, but before the app, the infrastructure to unlock the ability to code on the phone took another 2 years. So all in all, we worked on it
So
for 3 years, and the
3
company is like
years.
6 years old. so
Right.
so
Half
it's
the
a lot
company's
of work.
lifetime.
Yes, it's a lot of work.
I mean, it's incredible. So our platform is mostly people who are higher income, I would say. Even for them, 85% of our traffic is mobile, which shows how much penetration is there in India. In fact, I think there are 800 million mobile phone users. There is a large group of Indian youngsters who do not have a laptop. They just have a phone, and their only access to the world, the internet, is the phone. They just don't have a large screen. And I think it's amazing if they can code on their phone because they don't have a desktop device. That's the
Yes.
only device they have. And I think it could be game changing if it really picks up.
Yeah, and it is growing really fast, and especially in India, it's kind of growing virally now. A lot of influencers are covering it. Long way to go, and maybe we could talk about the kind of stuff we're doing in India to make the experience better. Should we?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we are launching a data center in India. It's not ours. We didn't build it physically. It's Google's data center, but we did a lot of things to replicate our infrastructure, and our first global presence is going to be in India. So
Oh,
yeah, so our first replica data center replica is going to be in India. I believe it's Bombay, but I think we're going to have multiple data centers as well. Um, and uh, and that's going to make the experience a lot better for Replit users, because Replit gives you an entire computer in the cloud. And the thing is, like,
right.
if you have this device, like, you have a powerful device in your pocket, but in addition to that, you're going to have access to a supercomputer in the cloud. You can
Right.
start any
Compute.
number of computers. You can host applications. You can do whatever you want on it. You can have access to the world's entire open source packages and software, and all of that is going to be close to you. So it's going to be very, very fast. So you're going to feel like you're sort of almost coding locally, but it's actually a powerful computer in the cloud. Um, at the same time, if you want to collaborate with someone in, say in the US, that goes through Google's backbone. So that's like better internet pipe, so it doesn't go through the public internet, and so it's going to be even faster, even if you're collaborating with people in the US as well. And yeah, that's going to be our sort of big launch, is our sort of data centers in India.
I do want to take a step back though and actually ask you about YC. I believe you had 750,000 registered users by the time you got in. So first of all,
Yeah.
why even apply to YC? What was the motivation behind that? And secondly, how did you rack up that many users?
Yeah. Yeah. So we applied to YC a ton of times. Like, we applied to YC when we first had the idea that we want to, work on this, and I wanted to leave Facebook. We got a rejection. Then when we started the company, the next batch, we applied to YC, we got a rejection. And that happened for 3, 4 times. I've lost count of how many times we got rejected from YC. Uh, in terms of users, I'll tell you how we ended up getting in a second, but in terms of like bootstrapping users, there was this initial uptick of users um, where just to make a product that's really good, and like, post it on Reddit, post it on Hacker News, post it on Twitter, if you have something that's good, people will try it. I think it's never been easier to launch something. And don't overthink it. If you have a product that you poured a lot of energy in and you think that people will enjoy it, just launch it everywhere. Launch it with product hunt. Just be annoying about it. Just like just like promote it, market it. Just put it everywhere. Yeah. So you're gonna get some initial traction just by doing that, and that's what happened with us. And then I think you want to engineer some growth. And so, how do you engineer the growth? It's like you just look at the kind of use cases that people are doing with your product. Any of them is fundamentally viral, right? For us, the teacher use case was a fundamentally viral use case because one teacher would bring another 20 students, right? So the viral coefficient of a teacher is huge. 20, And so we built teacher tools. So we went to teachers, we're like, okay, what do you want out of this platform? And they said, we want this and that. I want to do assignments, whatever. And we built all of that. And that was like another sort of growth period for us. The other thing to understand about growth is like, it doesn't like, it's not this like this idea that growth happens just sort of this exponential curve. Yes, there's some exponential growth when you have virality, but for example, when I joined Facebook, actually the growth was tapering. The Facebook had to build mobile to generate another sort of exponential curve. So they had this big mobile pivot in 2012, 2013 to actually create this next era of growth for Facebook. So growth happens either through campaign marketing, things like that, product launches, or engineered virality. And so we did everything we can to actually do all of this until this day. Like we continue to launch products and just think about things that help us grow faster. So by the time we got into YC, we had the teacher tools, and that was growing really fast. The fact that Replit is like fundamentally just like a link, I can give you a link to my program, that makes it inherently viral product as well.
I think just before we jump into India, a good segue, and also a challenge is the teacher-student ratio in India. It's 35 to 40. So it's a good thing for you if you're using the teacher tool because the viral coefficient is large. But I think we need to solve that problem because we're severely understaffed. I think you talked about India. Would love to pick that up more deeply. Why did you pick India as a country that you want to really double down on? You said it's the first global market. What gives you conviction, and any connection that you have with India specifically?
Yeah, so some of our first really avid users and entrepreneurs on the platform were from India. So we have, for example, this guy Samarth, who still uses Replit, who launched like a bunch of startups on Replit, and actually like went viral on Twitter and like met Paul Graham, and
Wow.
yeah, he had an amazing experience with Replit, and now he studies in Berkeley, and I think all this stuff sort of helped him get here, and I think he's now starting a startup. His name is Samarth Jaju, so you can find him on Twitter.
Yeah, and reach out to him and ask him, do you have a pitch deck? I'd like to
Yeah,
invest.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Um, so we had him. We have Lily, who was also an intern and a community manager at Replit. Our India community was from the start like pretty obvious, and it was like very entrepreneurial, very excited, really excited about Replit. The fact that like a lot of people don't have computers there or don't have like expensive MacBooks that they can install everything on made Replit really attractive. And so we had like a natural product market fit. And then as we got into it and we started understanding the Indian market, I mean, like India now produces more software engineers than any other country in the world.
Okay.
I think by next year you will have the largest developer population in the world. And correct me on that.
Yep. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's correct. In fact, one of my tweets that for some reason got picked up by a lot of US folks was India exports more software than Saudi Arabia exports oil
Yeah.
at this point, right? And like people were like, my God, this is insane. But you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and so okay, this is amazing. People are coming online in huge droves. The internet in India is like better than the US, like the internet infrastructure. It's like the payment infrastructure, UPI, sort of the India stack. That's all like really amazing. So you start looking into it and it's like, oh wow, like this country is on an explosive path for like software and technology in general. Um, and there's like a few big examples people know about in like SaaS. For example, like Zoho or Freshdesk, or those are like the traditional examples of like startup success. But like the startup ecosystem is growing like crazy. A lot of startups people use don't know that it's like Indian founded. Like Postman, is a very popular like dev tools, and I think
Correct.
Hasura and like a lot of infrastructure products
Yes.
as well are like from India. And it's like people do not know this because it's just a startup. Like you could use it anywhere, and like, but
Please
um,
read a junior VC. Please read a junior VC. There's a plug from us. We've written about all these companies, by the way.
awesome,
Um,
awesome. Yeah. And then you start looking at the startup ecosystem. It was like, okay, this is really crazy. Like the traditional view that India is like an outsourcing market is like totally wrong. Like it was
Absolutely.
maybe it was at some point, but it's like totally mistaking now as like, oh, that's like for software offshoring. That's not really the case. And I think it's only beginning because like all these startup successes, a lot of these exits are going to create another generation of entrepreneurs, and that's how the cycle grows. So for us, if we want to be at the ground level of growth, it just made sense for us to kind of really want to power the next generation of software engineers and entrepreneurs in India. So it was a no brainer that this is going to be the next place for growth for us.
And let's talk a bit about tactically how you're kind of doing that. What are some of the, Indian specific user attributes that you have, or some of the kind of things that you've done to customize for India? I believe you're planning to officially launch in January in India. So building up to that.
Yes. Yeah. So the biggest thing is the infrastructure and the speed and the issues that we have. Like just like looking at for example, we had a problem with auth in India. We had a problem with payment before we knew UPI was going to be a big thing. Like a lot of it just reacting to the issues and just listening to the market. We have Anshul who's sort of like our sole sort of India market guy, but everyone on the team is actually like paying attention very closely to the Indian use case. India is like our largest mobile user and signups, and so we're hearing a lot from customers like what could get better. Focusing more on performance on the phone is going to be important because a lot of people are using us with like maybe low end Android phones and like not iOS phones. So just like making the product more performative is going to be super important for India. Um, Ultimately, like from a feature set, is really not going to be that different. Like programming developers all over the world sort of want the same thing. We're localizing some content. We worked with Code with Harry, very popular Indian YouTuber, to create like 100 days of Python in Hindi. Um, and so some of it is content, and a lot is just like going in and like studying the market. Like the fact that you said what you said about just like how understaffed on teachers, that was like pretty obvious for us pretty early on. And another thing that's obvious, Aviral, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong or tell me more about that, but a lot of people that even go to computer science in university have to go and supplement their university education on their own.
Yes, that's right. Except maybe for the top colleges, the
Yes.
IITs, it's absolutely right.
Yeah. So a
The
lot
the
of
the other the other thing, just to add on to that point, which is very strange for a lot of people, is in India, every engineer becomes a software engineer. You can be a civil engineer, you can be a chemical engineer. It's almost a joke. It's so weird for an American to come to India and see a chemical engineering graduate doing coding, but in India it's widespread. Like, you will not believe it. It's incredible. That's the other thing that's a bit unique about India. Everyone ends up as a software engineer. You could have been studying civil engineering or chemical.
fascinating. And so yeah, that's another thing that we're seeing even in the data, that like a lot of people are just like learning on their own. So the teacher
Yes,
angle might help us, but I think maybe the angle we want to take is more self learning and like more, sorry about that, more focused on content for India. I think it's going to be a big thing for us.
I think India is a big market, and I'm very happy that for a company at your scale, you're fairly large, but still early in your journey. You prioritize India very early, and I think it'll do good. Um, and you'll be opening to a very different market. I think it's not going to be India only; it's going to be Southeast Asia, maybe Africa. A lot of such countries that are mobile first, which generally get neglected by a lot of large tech companies. In fact, Facebook did not. I think React JS worked so well because it was mobile friendly. Correct me
Hmm.
if I'm wrong.
Yes.
And that's what helped Facebook's explosion in India, WhatsApp's explosion in India. I think it's amazing. So thank you for thinking of India, and I think we're quite excited about what you guys are planning. What's in store for the future for Replit, both as a larger org and specifically for India? How are you thinking of next steps?
One thing we're really excited about is like so the traditional path is you learn a bit of programming, you go to school for 4 years, you maybe get an internship or two, and then finally you land a job and you start making money. But like, what if we collapse that and you could like make money really early on?
Right,
Maybe you learn some Python and maybe you can already start making money. So we have this sort of like more experimental product, but it's actually taking off in a massive way, called Bounties. And we have our actually one of our top bounty hunters is from India. He's a 13-year-old kid. His name is Gautam, and
wow,
he's one of the most
amazing.
prolific guys, and he's made thousands of dollars on bounties in just a weeks. And so basically like um, bounties is a place to get software done. So if you're a software professional, you can like go and like put a bounty on a software problem that you have, and then you're gonna have access to a ton of young, energetic talents from our community. That's probably like cheaper than getting a professional programmer, and as good, if not better, in a lot of cases.
Right,
Um, and for talent in India, it's going to be really meaningful. Like if you make like $100 a day or something like that from that, which is totally possible, it's going to be
right,
meaningful income from you. Like even if I was
absolutely.
back in Jordan, like making that kind of money would have been amazing. So we want to create opportunities for entrepreneurship on the platform, whether that's sort of like doing these small tasks, but also building startups and building applications that could be monetized on the platform itself. So adding more monetization opportunities on Replit is going to be a super exciting part of our future. We're also just constantly making the platform more powerful. We're about to release support for Postgres databases, so you can like have a sort of a database that can scale to any sort of like Replit, for example, runs on a Postgres database. So
Understand.
more scalable power and platform power on Replit. Um, and and finally, like I think we're gonna start getting into B2B probably like sometime next year.
Got
So,
it.
everyone who learned to code on Replit should be able to bring the tools to their work. Or if you start a
Right.
startup on Replit, you should be able to continue to use Replit in the future. So that's going to be a big area of focus for us.
And I think we can have a chat with you for hours. Unfortunately, we'll have to close it at some point. So our closing question is, what's one piece of unfiltered feedback or advice you've received in your journey as an entrepreneur or working in another company, which changed the way you looked at things? And brutally honest would help. I'm sure you would have heard a lot of it.
Yeah. Let me think for a second on this. That's a very interesting question. Haya, who's actually in the in the room behind me, is my co-founder and wife, gives me a lot of brutally honest feedback. I think one time she told me that I talk a lot,
Okay.
and which is helpful for this interview, right? Uh, but uh, but but like listening to user. So we would do user interviews, and I would talk most of the time instead of listen. And when you're building something, you want to listen a lot. And so listening is actually a skill that you can develop. And
Interesting.
good designers, good product people need to learn how to listen. And I think I think you still need to be creative. You still need to build things that people would not know how to tell you to build. But if you listen closely, you're gonna get a lot more data and understanding of your customers. And so that was like a big sort of unfiltered feedback to kind of like listen more and
Amazing.
talk less.
Amazing. What a lovely conversation. Thank you, Amjad, for sharing so openly with us. I'm sure our listeners will enjoy.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for everything you're doing for the startup ecosystem in India, and hopefully the next generation of like entrepreneurs will be like Replit programmers, and will create some deal flow for you.
Thank you. Thank you.